بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد خير الأولين وآخرين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وأثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا وعرضنا يا رب العالمين. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا حكيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. And welcome back to the study of Sheikh Abdullah bin Jawzi's book entitled Sayyid al-Khatir. This particular book, as mentioned on more than one occasion before, is pretty much just a list of reflections and musings by the author, and he decided that it was important to record them for the benefit of others. Now, today is a bit special in that the topic that we plan to cover today is perhaps the most or rather my favorite of all the topics we covered during this Ramadan. As mentioned before, the book is really thick, so there's not going to be enough time during the month of Ramadan to cover everything. The book itself, the book is probably close to 300 pages long, but initially, as I stated before, I was going to try to just choose selection from the book, for the purpose of getting the full benefit or the maximum benefit from the book itself. But I found that as you just read through each section, each chapter, that there's so many jewels that one can take away from the book itself. So I mentioned when I posted the link on my social media today that today we want to talk about the importance uh, of having financial independence on the part of imams and scholars, because that's really what he talks about in this particular two chapters we plan to cover today. But before even reading, I just want to just mention that, okay, that this particular topic is so important, especially when consider the fact that when we look at the structure of the relationship between the imams, the scholars, and the boards of masjids, or you can think about this in a lot of different ways. Even the relationship in the Muslim world between Muslim scholars and the rulers of those countries, that we find that imams and scholars have become employees in different particular contexts. So in the Muslim world, Muslim scholars, imams, muaddins, and other religious employees are actually employed by the governments of those countries. They have salaries. At any particular moment, those governments can decide, well, you no longer have a right to a salary if they say something wrong. The same thing can be said of Muslims and scholars living in Western countries, and that you have at the masajid, you have these boards of the masjid, typically which are occupied or filled by the technocrats, who can say doctors, engineers, and other types of people who perhaps we can consider to be the backbone of those communities, the financial backbone of those communities. They hire an imam or a scholar, they pay their salary, but the overall direction of the communities typically are dictated by the people with the money. And so the imam really can't get out of line. The imam really doesn't have full independence. If he says something that the board doesn't approve of, they get rid of the imam or the scholar. So all of us can find ourselves in precarious situations like that. We saw during COVID as well how many people who are threatened with firing if they didn't take the experimental quote unquote vaccine. Many people, they accepted that. They said, well, I have to take it, otherwise I'm going to lose my house, I'm going to lose so much that I have, because people are in massive amounts of debt. And when you're in that much debt, then it's easy for you to be turned into someone's slave or be compelled to actually obey their orders. So it's really, really important point of reflection, I think, from the author, even though he's focusing mainly on religious scholars. But this itself, it has sort of reverberations throughout society, because all of us compete. We compete for different things. Women may compete for a husband, men may compete for a wife. All of us may compete for fame and fortune, especially when the goods are very limited in number. It's not enough to go around. So that's sort of just the nature of life. Animals, non-human animals, they do the same thing, can compete for the prey or whatever it may be. So they wake up every day searching, looking for their sustenance. And there was a time in Muslim history there where we had what are called awqaf, or endowments, which the governments themselves really didn't have control over, right? So the salary of the imam could be paid from the endowment. So even if the imam or the scholar says something that the governors disapproved of, he couldn't cut off his sustenance, right? But when your sustenance itself is contingent upon the people who hire you, right, then that itself becomes a big problem. So this particular section is entitled "Fi Haqiqat al-Zuhd," regarding the reality of az-zuhd. Now, zuh is a word which can be translated in different ways, but fundamentally what zuh mean is the idea of sort of disavowing the world, right? Sort of say that, listen, I am not a worldly person. I'm a person of the hereafter. I'm going to disavow all of the pleasures of this life. So here you say, well, we're going to talk about what the reality of zuhd. What does zuhd really, or real zuhd, look like? What does it really look like? So he says, رَأَيْتُ مِنْ أَعْظَمِ حِيَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ وَمَكْرِهِ أَنْ يُحِيطَ أَرْبَابَ الْأَمْوَالِ بِالْآمَالِ وَالتَّشَاغُلِ بِاللَّذَّاتِ الْقَاطِعَةِ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ وَأَعْمَالِهَا. So again, another one of his reflections. So he said, I reflected and observed that one of the greatest tricks of Shaitan, and an aspect of his strategy, his plot, is that he actually helps people with money, or rather, he causes the people who have great wealth to be focused on their hopes. In other words, people sort of look for the future, say, I'm planning for the future, so I'm like, I'm assuming that I'm going to live for a long time. So I'm going to focus on just simply amassing more and more of the dunya, proliferating more and more of the dunya. And when it comes to my akhirah or my ibadah and things like that, I'll leave that until later. Inshallah, once I get these things out the way, then I'll come back to that. But he said Shaitan, one of his tricks is that, okay, he makes the people with a lot of wealth to be focused on their hopes, their future hopes, and then also to preoccupy themselves with the pleasures which actually cut them off from the hereafter, and the deeds that will be a benefit for them in the hereafter, right? So the Shaitan tricks the person into that. You say, well, again, I'll do it later. Then he says, فَإِذَا عَلَّقَهُمْ بِالْمَالِ تَحْرِيدًا عَلَى جَمْعِهِ وَحَثًّا عَلَى تَحْصِيلِهِ أَمَرَهُمْ بِحِرَاسَتِهِ بُخْلًا فذلك من متين حيله وقوي مكره. Right. So he says, so once he makes their hearts attached to the wealth, once he attaches them to their property, and then encourages them to amass it and to acquire it as much as possible, at that point, he then orders them to guard it by being stingy, by being close-handed. In other words, he said, listen, you have to hold on to this. You can't let it go, right? This is yours. You work hard for this. Now it belongs to you. And you can't just give it away to people, right? Because then you're going to end up impoverished once again. And so he says that this is, again, part of the strong aspect of Shaitan's trick, right? And his strategy against humanity, that he sort of, again, he makes you think about, okay, the future, plan for your future, but only with regard to the benefits that come to you in this world. Have you preoccupied with indulging in your lust, right, and all the things that distract you from the hereafter, right? And then once you have all the things that you want, he then says, listen, don't give anybody anything. This is all yours. ثم دفن في هذا الأمر من دقائق الحيل الخفية أن خوف من جمعه خوف من جمعه المؤمنين فنفر طالب آخرة منه وبادر التائب يخرج ما في يده. right? So then after this, the next thing he does is he buries, right? As it says, as a part of his, even much more subtle, tricks, is that he creates a type of fear in the hearts of believers against amassing and proliferating anything from the dunya. And so the individual who actually has a desire for the hereafter, he actually takes flight from dunyawi matters of the dunya. He takes flight against trying to pursue or acquire anything from this life. And so then the person who actually is committed to Toba, what does he do? He takes whatever he has and he gives it all away. Right? He gives it all away, right? And of course, when you think about this, just hearing this translation, you think, okay, well, isn't that what we're supposed to do? But Ibn Jawzi has a different thought about this. He feels like, okay, well, he said, now this may not be the smartest thing for one to do. So, in other words, again, it just from the aspect of shaitan's tricks. So he says, وَلَا يَزَالُ الشَّيْطَانُ يُحَرِّضُهُ عَلَى الزُّهْدِ وَيَأْمُرُهُ بِالتَّرْكِ وَيُخَوِّفُهُ مِنْ طُرُقَاتِ الْكَسْبِ إظهارا لنصحه وحفظ دينه وفي خفايا ذلك عجائب من مكره. So it says, so then the shaitan will then continue to urge the person to renounce the world, and he will order him to abandon, right? To order to abandon it, and he will make the paths to actually to acquiring sort of wealth, right, in this world, something that individual should be anxious about, should be fearful of. In other words, a pathway opens up for you to actually amass the dunya, become rich. Shaitan, you say, no, you're not supposed to be going after the dunya, so don't pursue the dunya. In other words, and Shaitan will actually do it in the form of an advisor, sincere advisor to that person. In other words, he says, that I'm a sincere advisor to you, that my counsel to you is that you don't take that you don't pursue the dunya, and again, because you're going to corrupt your deen if you do so, right? And then he says, and then among the secrets of that, the subtleties of that particular advice, there are many sort of wondrous and amazing things that actually are manifest from Shaitan's plot and his plot against the human being. So then he goes on and says, وَرُبَّمَا تَكَلَّمَ الشَّيْطَانُ عَلَى لِسَانِ بَعْضِ الْمَشَايِخِ الَّذِينَ يَقْتَدِي بِهِمْ التَّائِبِ فَيَقُولُ أُخْرَجْ مِنْ مَالِكَ. And then Shaitan then may come upon the tongue of some of the sheikhs or the teachers of the person that individual seeking Toba may take as an example. In other words, one of the people you look up to will come to you and say something like this. He says, "Ukhraj min malik," said you should give away all of your wealth. Give away all your wealth. Wadkhul fi zumratu zuhad, and then you should enter among the assembly of those who renounce the world. You become a pious person, right? Give up all that you own and join us. Join us among those people who have all renounced the world. ومتى كان ذلك ومتى كان لك غداء أو عشاء فلست من أهل الزهد ولا تنال مراتب العزم. So this person says to you, I may say to this person, individual who's seeking to renounce the world and repent to Allah, it said that if you actually have enough for lunch and for dinner, then you really have not renounced the world. You really have not renounced the world. If you have enough for lunch and dinner, you really haven't given up the world, and you have not reached the level of firm resolve, spiritual resolve. وربما كرر عليه الأحاديث البعيدة عن الصحة وواردة على سبب ولمعنى. And then even that same person may even go further and then even mention to you a number of hadith which are not sound, they're weak or fabricated hadith, which actually encourages someone to just give up everything that they own, right? So this is interesting. So he starts off this way. He say, well, this is how Shaitan may come to one of us. فَإِذَا أَخْرَجَ مَا فِي يَدِهِ وَتَعَطَّلَ عَنْ مَكَاسِبِهِ عَادَ يُعَلِّقُ طَمَعَهُ بِسِيرَةِ الْإِخْوَانِ أو يحسن عنده صحبة السلطان. Right? So he says, and so once that person gives away all that he owns, and then once he actually now has become idle from the pursuit of wealth and property, then عاد يعلق طمعه بصلة الإخوان. After that happens, what happens? The individual now, his own desire now becomes connected with his brethren, meaning that this individual now becomes dependent upon his own brethren. يحسن عنده صحبة السلطان. And then also what will happen is that within oneself, you are now even, again, because we're talking about a scholar, right? Because individual actually could make money, right, doing teaching deen, but it's like, well, you're not supposed to teach deen for money, right? That's the idea, right? But so it's that يحسن عنده صحبة السلطان. And so then someone will actually now make accompanying the sultan to be something attractive to that individual. No, because like with the sultan has, all the power, right? Because we pursue fame and fortune. That some people are okay with fortune, others, they want fame on top of that. Well, actually, to have fame is better than to have fortune, in the sense that if you have fame or if you have status, then it actually puts you into the company of the rich, right? So you actually now have many sort of pools of income that you can pull from. You can approach this person for this, approach that person when you need something as well. As opposed to simply going to one person all the time, right? So otherwise, so this individual gives away all of his wealth, and then now he stops working. So what happens is that in his heart is not right. His heart now says, you know what, I actually like that life that I used to lead, and so I need to go and seek some help from my brothers, right? Or I need to figure out a way that I can actually retrieve that status I once had. لأنه لا يقوى على طريق الزهد والترك إلا أياما. He said, why? Because the person is not strong enough to disavow the world or to abandon the world for just more than just a few days. In other words, it's like it's very hard. It's hard for you to say, said, I'm not gonna have anything to do with the dunya. He said, listen, I'm not gonna have a house. I'm not gonna get a car. I'm not going to, I'm not going to rely upon anybody other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm just going to go to the masjid, and I'm going to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. I'm going to spend all my time studying. That's it. Right. And then the provisions, they'll come, inshallah. Eventually they'll come. But what happens in most cases is that the average person says, you know what, this is hard. Now you become a beggar, and then you come with your hand out. ثم يعود الطبع فيتقاضى مطلوباته فيقع في أقبح مما فر منه ويبذل أول السرع في التحصيل دينه وعرضه. He said, so, and then what happens is that now the individual's very nature, right, it returns seeking, right, all the things that it had lost. And then he also will fall into even more embarrassing of a situation than the situation he fled from, right? And he will extend or actually offer the first commodity that he has, or the most important of the commodities he had, which is his religion and his honor. وَيَصِيرُ مُتَمَنْدَلًا بِهِ وَيَقِفُ فِي مَقَامِ الْيَدِ السُّفْلَى, right? And then that individual become like a handkerchief that people use to sort of wipe themselves with. I forget, we have an expression like this, similar in English. I'm trying to remember what it is. Like, in other words, it's like people, they walk all over you. You get walked over by people as a result of it. And then, and what happens is that you become an individual who is at the lower status of society. You're the individual with your hand out. You're the lower hand in society at that moment. And he says, فَلَوْ أَنَّهُ نَظَرَ فِي سِيرِ الرِّجَالِ وَنُبَلَائِهِمْ وتأمل صحاح الأحاديث عن رؤسائهم لعلم أن الخليل عليه الصلاة والسلام كان كثير المال حتى ضاقت بلدته بمواشيه، وكذلك لوط عليه الصلاة والسلام، وكثير من الأنبياء عليهم الصلاة والسلام، والجم الغفير من الصحابة. Right. So he says, so if he were to look into the life stories of the great men of Islamic history, or the great men of history, right? Then, and if he were to look and observe the sound narrations from about the leaders among them, then he would know that Ibrahim alayhi salam, that he was rich at one time, that he was rich at the one time until his town actually fell into famine, right? The drought, right? And famine, and so like the animals, the livestock, they disappeared, right? A lot of them disappeared. He said the same thing with the Prophet Lut alayhi salam. He had a lot of wealth, and the same thing with a lot of other prophets and many of the Sahaba. All of them are wealthy. And you think about the Prophet alayhi salam at the beginning of his mission. Who are the people, his early followers? Of course, we know Bilal and Rabah. He was a slave. Bilal couldn't do much to the Prophet to help the Prophet alayhi salam, but who saved Bilal? Who set him free? It was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Abu Bakr was rich. Uthman ibn Affan was rich. Abdurrahman bin Auf was rich. Right? These great early Sahaba, they were rich people, and so they came and they helped the Prophet alayhi, right, and help him in his mission. وكان أبو بكر رضي الله عنه يخرج للتجارة والرسول حي. Abu Bakr, he used to go out to trade and do business while the Prophet was alive. وكان أكثرهم يخرج فاضل ما يأخذ من بيت المال ويسلم من ذل الحاجة إلى الإخوان. ويسلم من ذل الحاجة إلى الإخوان. وكان أكثرهم يخرج فاضل ما يأخذ من بيت المال. So they said most of them, what they should do, they should give away the surplus that they receive from the treasury. In other words, Abu Bakr himself, he paid himself from the treasury. Umar ibn Khattab paid himself from the treasury. But again, they took only the things that they needed, and anything that was extra and surplus, a surplus of that, they gave it away, right? And as a result of that, what happened? They were free from the degradation and the debasement and the humiliation that comes from dependency upon one's brethren, right? So you have to go to people and ask them for money all the time. لقد كان ابن عمر لا يرد شيئا ولا يسأل. He said Ibn Umar, he never rejected a gift given to him, but he also was not a beggar. Often the Prophet ﷺ would come to Ibn Umar and he would give him things. And Ibn Umar would say, Ya Rasulullah, give it to someone who actually is more impoverished than I am, more needy than me. Right? So almost any time that happened in multiple narrations like that, and the Prophet ﷺ would offer him things and he would decline and say, find someone who actually is more in greater need than I am. But then the Prophet also told him that on one particular occasion that anytime something like this comes to you, you should take it. You should take it, right? And but you should not actually, your heart should not be desirous of what people have, right? Alayhi salatu wasalam. وإني تأملت على أثر أهل الدين والعلم هذه الحال فوجدت العلم شغلهم عن المكاسب في بداياتهم فلم احتاجوا إلى قوام نفوسهم ذلوا وهم أحق بالعز. He said, I also noticed that the majority of the religious people and the people of knowledge, they are in this state. This is their condition. The vast majority of people of knowledge in this state. And of course, it makes me reflect as well. Like, I've been very fortunate that, alhamdulillah, that I've been able to work where I work, right? And so most of my peers, they're either imams or they are on the lecture circuit. They're traveling around, giving lectures, right? And that's the way they provide for themselves, provide for their families. But there's a lot of competition, right, in those particular fields, right? So you have to be like an excellent orator. You have to find a way to distinguish yourself, right? And so because people are really much, sort of attracted to people who are more entertaining than others, right? So to make a name for yourself, you have to do a little bit extra. You have to sort of even be somewhat disingenuous, right, in order to be noticed, right? That this is what happens in that particular field. So Ibn Jawzi said, I've noticed that most religious people and most of the ulama, that this is their state. This is their state. I noticed that knowledge is what prevented them from going out and getting, we could say, going out to get a regular job, right, at the beginning, right? So in other words, they were focused on learning. So as they're focused on learning, they're not focusing on going out and acquiring wealth to take care of themselves. Quite often, they're provided for by, again, the awqaf, the endowments. They're providing for students, stipends and things like that. Their food, everything's taken care of, right? So that itself gives them less reason to have to go out and seek their provision, right? But he said, but once they fall into need, right? They fall to need. What happens? Said then they debase themselves, even though they themselves are the most deserving of people of honor. They're the most deserving of people of honor, right? They need to be honored, right, and treated as nobles, right? But what happens is that when people fall into needs, what happens again? They start to do things that make people look at them in funny ways. وقد كانوا قديما يكفيهم بيت المال فضولات الإخوان فلما عدمت في هذا الأواني لم يقدر متدين على شيء إلا ببذل شيء من دينه وليته قدر فربما تلف الدين ولم يحصل له شيء. It says, in the old days, right? Because he's the 6th century of Islam, right? So as in the old days, the Beit al-Mal, the treasury, the Muslim treasury itself, used to provide, right, for these people, the religious class and the ulama class, all that they need, and they had no need to go to their brethren to ask them for anything. But once that wealth itself was exhausted from the treasuries or this additional money that people were paid, right, during this time. So once this self was exhausted, then what happened is that the individual who's religious, focused on religion, was not able to do anything without offering something, right, from his deen in exchange for it. وَلَيْتَهُ قَدَرْ. He said, and I wish he actually was able, right, to provide for himself. فَرُبَّمَا تَلِفَ الدِّينُ وَلَمْ يَحْصُلْ لَهُ شَيْءٍ. Because sometimes what happens is that religiosity is lost, right? And this individual doesn't achieve anything, right? And as a result of whatever thing that they give when they give their deen in exchange for the property or the dunya that they're seeking. فَالْوَاجِبُ عَلَى الْعَاقِلِ أَنْ يَحْفَظَ مَا مَعَهُ. So he says, so it is a duty upon the rational person, the intelligent person, to keep what he has, right? To keep what you have. In other words, so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with knowledge, but also blessed you with property, blessed you with wealth, say, keep what you have, right? وَأَنْ يَجْتَهِدَ فِي الْكَسْبِ لِيَرْبَحَ مُدَارَةَ ظَالِمٍ ليربح مداراة ظالم ومداهنة جاهل ولا يلتفت إلى ترهات المتصوفة الذين يدعون في فقر ما يدعون. So it says that, so the rational person, the intelligent person, should keep what he has and show due diligence to go out and acquire wealth so that he can profit what? What will he profit? He will profit the flattery of the tyrant and that of the ignorant. In other words, if you have your own source of income, then you don't need to actually go and act in a certain way towards a tyrant. In other words, you're nice to them, you say all the nice things, you try to get close to them because you know that they can help you in some way. You don't need to do that, right? And you also don't need to go and flatter an ignorant person or an unlearned person. You go to an unlearned people and to seek their help to provide for you and for your family, for instance. And then he says, and don't pay attention to the trifles of the so-called Sufis who claim what they claim with respect to poverty. And so he's talking about what he talked about before. Someone comes and say, just give away all your wealth, right? In other words, because this is the path of zuhud. This is the path of the disavowal of the world. And if you're a true zahid, you will give away everything that you own, right? So he says, so he calls this turrahat al-mutasawwifa, the trifles of the pseudo Sufis, right? The mutasawwifa, right? Those who claim to be Sufis, but he says that they're not really Sufis, right? Because a Sufi is the person who's arrived and realized their iman, right? فَمَا الْفَقْرُ إِلَّا مَرَضُ الْعَجَزَ. He says, because poverty is nothing more than the sickness of the impotent, is the sickness of the impotent, sickness of the incompetent, right? So in other words, people are poor. Why? Because they don't put forth effort to try to become rich. That's really what he's suggesting, is that, so when people are poor, quite often what they do is they say, you know what, I'm a zahid. I've renounced the world. They said, no, you haven't renounced the world. You're just poor, right? So this is fundamentally what it said. It's like, "ما الفقر إلا مرض العجزة وللصابر على فقر ثواب الصابر وللصابر على فقر ثواب الصابر على المرض." And then he says that the reward, that the person who is patient in poverty gets the reward of one who is patient during illness. Allahumma illa iyakuna jabbanan ana tasarrufi muqtani'an bil kafaf. He said, unless, right? So in other words, if you're patient in times of poverty, you're going to get the reward that one receives when one is sick and also endures illness. He said, unless you happen to be someone who's too cowardly to go out and seek your provision, and you're actually content with kafaf. In other words, having your hand out, standing on the road with your hand out, asking people for things. For they said that kafaf can also mean just you're content with living with just your basic needs, right? But I believe he means by this, that you're actually going to be there with your hand out, similar to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says that it's better for a man to go out and gather up some firewood, right, and then come to sell it, than for him to stand on the road, yatakaffafuna nas, for them stand with their hands out, to the people, who may give or they may not give, right? So that's actually the Prophet ﷺ discouraging us from begging, right? In other words, if we need something, we should offer our services to someone, right? That's actually Islam. Islam is not welfare. Islam is not just simply saying, hey, well, the government's going to give it to us, so I don't need to look for work. I don't need to offer anything in exchange. I don't need to pursue any type of talent, right? Or try to find a talent, use a talent that I might have, right? To take care of myself, right? So basically he said that, so if you're this state, then you're fundamentally, you're not going to get the reward. He said, you're not going to get the reward of being patient or enduring poverty. فَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ مِنْ مَرَاتِبِ الْأَبْطَالِ. He said that is not the status of a hero, right? This is not a hero, right? A person who just simply, said, listen, I'm not going to work, but I'm just going to go ask people to give me things that I need so I can continue to do worship and to study knowledge of Islam, right? بل هو من مقامات الجبناء الزهادي, right? He said, no, this is the station, right, of the cowards among the zuhad, those people who renounce the world. So he said, you're a cowardly person. You're not a true zahid, right? وأما الكاسب ليكون معطيا لا المعطى ومتصدق لا متصدق عليه فهي من مراتب الشجعان الفضلاء. He said, as for the person who actually goes out and inquires wealth so that he can be the giver, not the one given, that he can be the one who donates, not the one donated to, said this itself is part of being, this is among the ranks of the courageous and virtuous people. Courageous and virtuous people. So again, very important section. Now, the second section is a continuation of this, right? In some ways, right? So this is entitled "La ta'sa ala ma fataka min ad-dunya." Right? So do not be sad about or don't fret about what you've missed from the dunya. Right? تأملت أحوال الفضلاء فوجدتهم في الأغلب قد بخسوا من حظوظ الدنيا ورأيت الدنيا غالبا في أيدي أهل النقائص. So once again, so another reflection I've had. So I reflected about the state of the virtuous people. And I noticed that most of the times they themselves, they have been denied their share of this world. But I also noticed that the dunya itself most of the times is in the hands. I'm speaking Arabic, English. That I've noticed that this dunya most of the time is in the hands of the people of imperfection. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the dunya to those he loves and those he doesn't love. Right? But he only gives the akhirat to those he loves, right? As the famous statement attributed to the Prophet ﷺ goes, right? So he said, I noticed that Allah gives the dunya, and for the most part, it gives it to the people of imperfection. And he doesn't give it, in most cases, to the people of perfection or the people he saw the virtuous people. فنظرت في الفضلاء فإذا هم يتأسفون على ما فاتهم مما ناله أولو النقص وربما تقطع بعضهم أسفا على ذلك. So then I took a look at the virtuous people, and I noticed that among them are those who actually are regretful of the fact that they themselves have not achieved or acquired the things that the people of imperfection have acquired. And some of them, they really beat themselves up, with regret about that. فخاطبت بعض المتأسفين فقلت له ويحك تدبر أمرك فإنك غالط من وجوه. So I said, so then I spoke to one of those people who are remorseful about this fact. And I said to him, God show you mercy. Wayhak. Allah be merciful to you. All right. Tadabbar amrak. In other words, reflect upon your matter, your affair. Because you said you're errant from many different regards, that you are mistaken from multiple ways. أحدها أنه إن كانت لك همة في طلب الدنيا فاجتهد في طلبها. It says, because firstly, if you truly have a fervor or zeal about the pursuit of this world, then you should be diligent about its pursuit. تربح التأسف على فوتها. Because if you do so, then you also will earn regret about losing it, right? فإن قعودك متأسفا على ما نالك غيرك مع قصور اجتهادك غاية العجز. He said, because you yourself sitting around just being regretful about the things that others have achieved while you yourself put forth no effort, that itself is the epitome of impotence, is epitome of just like, in some ways you can think about stupidity, right? It says, well, you're sitting here complaining about not having things that other people have. And you could have them, but you're not putting forth an effort. So basically he's saying to say, if you want the dunya, then go get it. Right? Don't sit around speaking about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to someone else and didn't give it to you. So if you want it, go work for it, you can get it. الثاني أن الدنيا إنما تراد لتعبر لا لتعمر وهذا هو الذي يدلك عليه علمك ويبلغه فهمك. Is that the second error is that the dunya is only been created to be crossed over, not to be occupied. Now, Allah, there's a famous statement attributed to Isa bin Maryam, that he says that dunya qantara fa'buruha la ta'muruha. He said the dunya is a bridge, cross over it, do not occupy it. So it says the dunya has been created only so that it could be crossed over, not for it to be occupied. And it said, and in this fact, this is what your knowledge indicates to you, and it is also what your understand will help you to reach. وَمَا يَنَالُهُ أَهْلُ النَّقْصِ مِنْ فُضُولِهَا يُؤْذِي أَبْدَانَهُم وَأَدْيَانَهُم. And said, in all the things that the people of imperfection they achieve from the surplus and all these beautiful things of this dunya, these nice things of this dunya, what do? Those things, they harm their bodies and they harm their religion. Harm their bodies, harm their religion, right? I mean, think about so many of us, right? All of us in a lot of ways are the people of naqs, right? To be totally honest, right? Because talking about this, we may have the tendency to think, okay, we're thinking about all those super rich people, the millionaires and the billionaires, right? No, like being ghani, shar'an, means for you to have all the things that you need. We live like kings and queens today. We have more than that. 1, 2 cars. You have a very spacious home that you live in. You have how many changes of clothing? 30 changes, 30 sort of suits that you can change into in a given day, right? That we look like kings and queens. So he's talking about people like us, right? So he's like saying, we are the people of naqs. So he says, so these other people who are not the people of naqs, he says, that you shouldn't be, regretful about this, that you shouldn't want to be like them, because when you look at their situation, all that they have, what is it? It harms their bodies and it harms their religion. I mean, how many of us are overweight? How many illnesses do the average one of us have, right? How many pills are you taking, right? So it harms your deen as well. فإذا عرفت ذلك ثم تأسفت على فقد ما فقده أصلح لك كان تأسفك عقوبة لتأسفك على ما تعلم مصلحة في بعده. So it's a really interesting way that he phrases all this, right? So says, so once you realize this, once you notice this, and you notice what? Again, that the dunya, it harms the bodies and the religious state of the people of imperfection. Once you realize this, once you recognize this, then and then and then you continue to actually feel regretful about losing the thing whose lack of ownership is better for you, then your sense of regret itself is a punishment for feeling regret for something you know whose benefit is actually better in being far away from that thing, right? In other words, that you know that your greater benefit actually comes by having less of the dunya, right? But you feel upset and about the fact that Allah didn't give it to you, but it gave it to someone else, right? Right. So it says, so that itself, that experience that you're having, that feeling of remorse and regret that you have, that itself is a punishment. It's a punishment. Why? Because your heart is attached to something it should not be attached to. فَقْنَعْ بِذَلِكَ عَذَابًا عَاجِلًا إِن سَلَمْتَ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ الْآجِلِ. So he says, be convinced, be content with that as an immediate punishment if it happens that you're safe from the future punishment, right? So in other words, if you experience that now, but then come to the realization that this is a punishment, then that's a good thing, right? Because if you never come to that realization, then you may actually experience another punishment in the future. وَلَنُذِيقَنَّهُم مِّنْ عَذَابٍ أَدْنَىٰ دُونَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَكْبَرِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. As the Quran says, that will make them taste of the lesser punishment before the greater punishment in order for them to return, in order that they shall return. Return here for us, return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, return to the path of righteousness. So again, so that's, he says, so this is the second error on the part of this individual who thinks of this. This is what he told this man, he told this person. الثالث, the third mistake, أنك قد علمت بخس حظ الآدمي في الجملة من مطاعب الدنيا ولذاتها بالإضافة إلى الحيوان البهيم لأنه ينال ذلك أكثر مقدارا مع أمن وأنت تناله مع خوف وقلة مقدار. He says, so thirdly is that you already know that when we compare the portion of this world that the human being actually is able to amass and benefit from, right, compared to that, right, that animals, right, who live in the wild benefit from, right, there's no comparison between the two. In other words, and that's because those animals, they actually achieve a greater portion of these things while experiencing safety, right? In other words, you think of a lion, right? A lion typically is not afraid of anything, right? A lion goes after its prey, and the animals, pretty much start their days with, okay, I need to eat. I need something to eat. And, then they find something to eat. Maybe it's enough, maybe it's not, but eventually the next moment, they need something to eat. But they go through this particular process, this experience, while being in a state of security, while you achieve it while being in a state of fear and paucity of scope and measure, right? In other words, you get a small amount compared to what these animals receive, right? In other words, in terms of what you consume in your body, right? فإذا ضُعِفَ حظك من ذلك كان ذلك لاحظا كان ذلك لاحقا بالحيوان البهيم. So if your portion is doubled from this dunya, then that would mean that you now have joined the wild animal, right? Yeah, in the category of the wild animal or the predatory animal, right? And that's like the Quran, إنهم كالأنعام بل هم أضل, that they're just like cattle, rather they are more astray, right? So in other words, people who live just to experience, right, pleasure in this world, right? To eat, to drink, etc. Right? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or if it happens that your portion of the dunya is doubled, then you would just be like just another animal, right? You wouldn't be a human being anymore at that moment. من جهة أنه يشغله ذلك عن تحصيل الفضائل. Right. And so otherwise, so you will be like those other animals. You'll be nothing like you'll be just like the cattle from the regard of that particular thing preoccupying you or distracting you from the acquisition of virtues, of moral virtue. وتخفيف المؤن يحث صاحبه على نيل المراتب. Right. And the having just a small burden, financial burdens itself, is something that encourages people to achieve high grades of morality. In other words, if you don't have many things, many bills, many sort of, expenses, your expenses are small, then you have time to actually become a better person, right? But if you have many expenses, you will be overwhelmed with trying to cover those expenses, right? As so many of us actually do on a regular basis, right? You get paid, and so you may have a high salary, but how many expenses do you have? How many bills? Quite often people will say, well, this person is a millionaire. But okay, well, what type of lifestyle is that person living? And when you look and say, he has big mansions, 2, 3 houses, maybe have 5, 10 cars, right? And have a whole bunch of other things as well, right? But we often don't think about, okay, well, maybe this person also has a lot of bills, right? So that extra money was given to that person so that person can pay those extra bills. So when you come to that person and say, hey, well, can I borrow $1,000? Can I borrow $10,000? They may not have it. And if they say to you that they don't have it, you might say, well, I don't believe you. You're rich and I'm poor, right? But it may be that the person is really telling the truth. So basically saying, well, when you have a very small sort of like burden, financial burden, then that financial burden, grants you a opportunity for you to actually do other things to improve on who you are and to live for the reasons you were created. فإذا آثرت الفضول مع قلة الفضول عدت على ما علمت بالإزراء فشنت علمك ودللت على اختلاط رأيك. Right. So once you actually prefer the fudul, right, of this dunya, right, in other words, the surplus of this dunya, while you self have a small amount, right, of the surplus, right, and that is something that you're pursuing now, you're pursuing an increase in it, then that itself will lead to your derision, right, and it actually will harm your knowledge, or in the sense that people will see you as not truly a committed, learned person, right, and actually also will indicate the confused state of your mind, right? So this is like where we end today. But I thought it was a very fascinating section from this particular book, al-Khatir. Hopefully it was beneficial to all of you as well. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and continue to increase you. And inshallah, Saturday we'll have another class once more and see what else we can amass or sort of glean from this very important book, very special book by Imam Abdullah bin al-Jawzi. And again, as I state every single week, please do support the Lamppost Education Initiative. We're not asking for a lot this month. It's $10,000. Help us reach $10,000. Give what you can. Encourage your friends. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.